Okay, let's do it.
Let's do it. Welcome to Inspired Leadership. My name is Tyler Bailey, and I'm here with Susan Power. This podcast is to celebrate real-life experiences of inspired leadership. We are trying to bridge the gap between millennials and the corporate world. If you do like this podcast, please give it a like. Every single bit counts. Today on the podcast, we have Drew Dudley. Most of leadership comes from people who don't see themselves as leaders. Drew Dudley, an author of the international bestseller, This Is Day One, a practical guide to leadership that matters, has dedicated his life to changing that reality. See, Drew has a TED Talk, you might have seen it, called Everyday Leadership, better known as the Lollipop Moment. It has amassed over 5 million views around the web, become a fundamental part of training and leadership programs all over the world, and been voted one of 15 most inspirational TED Talks of all time. Drew's Day One leadership philosophy was developed through his time running Canada's largest student leadership program, which is held at University of Toronto. And this has all been shared with a lot of dynamic organizations such as McDonald, JP Morgan, the United Nations, YMCA. The philosophy provides a step-by-step process to identifying and living up to your personal leadership values. More importantly, to recognize the leadership impact every individual can choose to have on a daily basis. And now, let's hop into the cast. Drew, welcome to the Inspired Leadership Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Susan Tyler. It's good to be here.
So it almost sounds like when you say Susan Tyler, it sounds like Steven Tyler.
That's very, very true. You know what? I actually thought that myself, and I'm glad you caught it.
Susan Tyler. I think I need some like pajamas that say Susan
Even
Tyler.
Tyler. Maybe he's a future guest, Tyler.
I'll tune in for that one.
Yeah, more people will tune in for Drew, I think. All right. There you go. So first thing, just to let our listeners know a little bit about you. From the intro they heard as well, but a little bit about what is a day in the life of Drew Dudley like?
You know, that really depends on the day.
Nice.
Like if you wanted to look like today, I hope I have more days like today in my life. Because today I got up at 6:30 in the morning because I have this amazing group of people that do an event called Project Finished. And the idea is that every single person has a project, something that they've been meaning to do, whether it's paperwork or whether it's writing the book or, you know, finishing that album, whatever it might be. We never seem to make time for it. So there's a group right now of 10 people who have committed every weekday for a month to get up, check in on Zoom at 7 a.m., and then work, often with the Zoom still on, so everybody can see everybody else sitting in front of their computers. And then, 90 minutes later, we check in and talk about what we did. And that's how I started my day. It's how I started my day for the last couple of weeks. And, then I hopped out and did 3 meetings while walking. I used to be about 320 pounds. Wow. And now try to walk between, 15 and 30,000 steps in a day.
Do you have a Fitbit?
I do, actually. So I can tell you that right now we're at 23,000 steps at 2:00 in the afternoon.
Oh my gosh.
But I love meeting while walking. Everyone's like, let's have a coffee. And I find you just think better when you're out in the sun walking along. And I managed to have 3 great meetings with 3 brilliant people talking about life and business and entrepreneurship. I learned something amazing today. My buddy Blake, who's this great entrepreneur, he's the guy who cooked up Project Finished, we were just walking along and he said, I always try to remember that I'm already a trillionaire. Like it's Wednesday morning and I'm out with a friend and this is my work and I'm already rich. I've already won the lottery. And he coined a term I'm going to use for a while. I just heard today, he said, I'm a chillionaire, which is to say that the only currency that you should evaluate isn't just money. Like we have the ability to basically chill out, meet, talk with great people, and that's part of our work. And if you have a life where you can take time without stress to exercise, to be out in the sun, to work with great people, and to relax as you lean into your work, that makes you a chillionaire. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, that is such a cool way to look at life, that, a billionaire, millionaire, trillionaire, it's all about money. But to be a chillionaire means that you also have peace and harmony and relaxation. And I think that's great. You know, lunch, a podcast to talk about what I love. I'm going to head out kickbox, finish the day off by checking email, which I try to only do in the morning and the afternoon. I don't let it drive my day. And then tonight I'm going to go catch a musical.
Awesome. You're living my ideal day. That sounds like the best day ever. Kickboxing, podcast, musical, all in one day. I love that.
Yeah, and that's today. And then on the other side, which I enjoy just as much, you know, a typical Drew Dudley day is going to go, you get up, you head to the airport, you wait for your flight, you fly wherever, you get to the hotel, you try to get another long walk in whatever great city you're at. And then usually I hit the stage and do it all over again. And that honestly, prior to the last couple of weeks, has been my life for about 10 months in a row, and really for about 10 years in a row. It's a lot of travel, a lot of getting to stand up and share ideas, meet some new people, and then on to the next one. It's sort of the littlest hobo if you're Canadian and you get that reference. And God, life is really good right now.
So Drew, as a chillionaire, I love that term. I'm going to start using that. You speak on leadership. You travel around the world speaking on leadership. We like to ask our guests this question. I'm very curious how you'll answer it. What does inspired leadership mean to Drew Dudley?
I think inspired leadership comes from when you're living your leadership. My work ultimately is about saying that to people that let's reframe leadership, that ultimately at its core, leadership is trying to close the gap between the person you want to be and how you're actually behaving, because that gap exists for everybody. It's nothing to be ashamed of. What you should be ashamed of is if you deny that gap exists, if you rationalize it away, which is what most of us do. We rationalize this gap between who we want to be and how we're behaving as being temporary. We're only compromising until we graduate. We're only compromising until we pay off our student loans, until we pay off the mortgage, until the wedding is done. There's always some big thing in our life that allows us to rationalize the gap between who we want to be and how we're behaving. And my argument is that truly inspired leadership isn't leadership that you stole from someone else. And by that, I mean, you didn't look at someone else's life or someone else's accomplishments and said, that's what leadership means, and I'm going to strive towards that. Inspired leadership is recognizing that the most fundamental leadership is your own, is closing the gap between who you want to be and how you're actually behaving, which is why I've always said that all of your leadership heroes should be people that you know personally. Because people like to say, oh, it's JFK or it's Martin Luther King. And these are all people that you could admire. But I think when we break it down, with famous leaders, all you see is the outcome of their decisions. You don't actually see how or why they made their decisions. Mm-hmm. And the people in your life that you see every day, you get to see how they make decisions and why. And I think that is a more valuable source of people's leadership than just seeing the end result of it, and specifically, really, the PR that comes out of their decisions. And so I think that inspired leadership is paying attention to leadership that is your own, that is daily, that is designed to build the best you. And in a world that keeps saying you should look to other people to determine your leadership, I think the definition of a truly inspired leadership is looking to yourself to do that. And ultimately, why my work is about helping people figure out what that means for them and then how to actually do it. But that's the most inspired leadership you can have, is to be able to realize that it doesn't need to be big and famous. What it needs to be is your own.
Hey, you have a book titled This is Day One, a practical guide to leadership that matters. What is the day one approach to leadership?
Yeah, I think overall, the day one approach is designed to help what really is my overall mission, which is to close the gap, again, here's a gap, between the number of people on this planet who are leaders and the number of people on this planet who see themselves as leaders. There's a gap between those two things. Most of the leadership on the planet comes from people who don't see themselves as leaders. And I want to close that gap. And day one, the idea is leadership has been put on such a pedestal that most people see it as bigger than they are. And as such, they don't know where to start. And so the idea of day one leadership is, in its name, I wanted to convey the idea that this is where you begin in your leadership, whether you already see yourself as a leader or you've never seen it as part of your identity. And a big part of it came from my personal experiences in life. And I've had a lot of day ones. There is no one day in anything that you want. One day in your career, one day in your physical health, one day in your mental health, one day in your relationship. There is no one day on this planet that didn't begin with a day one. And I've had so many day ones in my life. Day one, starting my own company. Day one of going from, 320 pounds to 100 pounds lighter. Day one of openly talking about my particular mental illness. I'm bipolar, which I kept secret for a long time because we still live in a world where mental illness is equated with mental weakness. Mm-hmm. And my whole job is based on the idea that people find my ideas credible. And so for many years, I kept that quiet, trying to feed into this idea that we're taught when we're young, which is, hey, to truly be impressive, you have to make people look at you and say, oh, wow, I didn't know that. And really the biggest gift you can give people, all of us, is to make people say, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. And so I had day one of talking about my role or my life with mental illness, and I had day one of a life without alcohol. And one of the things I learned in recovery is that if you don't want to have a drink for the rest of your life, you have to choose to not have a drink today. And you don't worry about the past, and you don't worry about the future. You treat every day of the rest of your life as if it is your first day of recovery. Because every day one comes with an inherent commitment, an inherent humility, and inherent forgiveness. You can screw up on day one. It doesn't mean you're not worthy of the mission. It means you screwed up on day one like everybody does. And if you've done something for 20 years consistently, that doesn't matter if you don't do it today. And so day ones are when you identify specific behaviors that should be a part of your life every day for the rest of your life, and you commit to those behaviors. You identify them, and then you say, this is my commitment. I'm going to treat every day like it's my first day on this mission, my first day when I'm exercising, my first day when I'm not drinking, my first day when I am acting like a leader. That's the day one approach. It is to say, do not evaluate leadership over blocks of time. Okay, how have I done this quarter? How have I done this year? How am I doing in my 5-year plan? What is my life looking like compared to other people's? That's evaluating life and leadership over a block of time. If you evaluate your leadership just based on non-negotiable behaviors you've committed to today, and you string enough of those days together, you are going to create the change that you want to see. You're going to close that gap between who you want to be and how you're actually behaving, and you're going to make the world a better place. Day one is where you start.
That's very refreshing, because I think a lot of leaders, not all, but a lot of leaders become complacent when they reach a certain level in their career or their life. They kind of get the attitude, I've made it now. I can kind of sit back a little bit, breathe the sigh of relief. But that day one mentality is completely what you said. You're always looking at things from being your last decision as good as you can be today as a leader.
Yeah, a buddy of mine who had had a heart transplant when he was very young commented that, live like it's your last day is terrible advice. Live like you're going to die tomorrow, because the world would be a pretty terrible place if everybody lived like they're going to die tomorrow. Like the concept of consequences is an important one, I think. But he said, just live. And I was interviewing a really successful CEO who said, live your life like you have a 50-50 chance of living 5 more years. 50-50, because his twin brother, that was with a medical issue, that was his reality. There was a 50-50 chance he would live 5 years. And he said, if you approach your life as if there's only a 50% chance that you could live 5 years, basically you still make good decisions, because you never know how long it's going to be. But at the same time, you do live with a purpose and an appreciation of how valuable time is. And instead of saying live like it's your last day, he said live every day like there's only a 50-50 chance you'll live longer than 5 years. And that keeps that idea of seize the day, but at the same time keeps you from just being like, who cares about consequences? Let's go. The day one approach, to loop back a little bit, when you talk about people becoming complacent, what's interesting is they get to a certain point and they say, okay, well, this is what I'm supposed to want. But a lot of people out there, they get those things and they don't feel as if they're accomplished, but they become complacent because they were told they're supposed to feel accomplished. The day one approaches I wanted to get across to people is that every single day you wake up having accomplished the exact same number of leadership. Everybody wakes up every morning having accomplished the exact same number of leadership behaviors that day. 0. So the janitor at Microsoft woke up, and when he wakes up, he and Bill Gates have done the exact same number of leadership actions in a given day. And if that janitor does more things to help people, to empower people, that creates a better culture, if he does more in a given day than Bill Gates, then he is a bigger leader than Bill Gates that day. And I think when we all look at it that way, we recognize we all wake up with the same opportunity and obligation to act like a leader that day. But if people figure, okay, well, I'm 35 years old and this is what my job is, they just say, well, what's the point now? Because clearly time has shown me not to be a leader. But I'm like, it's not time that shows you if you're a leader, it's today. And I guess today is time, but you know what I mean.
And that's empowering to people. So how do we create that type of mindset of possibility where we help create an environment where anything's possible in our workplaces and in our lives? How do you get people to act on that?
Maybe this is contrary, but one, anything isn't possible. And I think that I understand the sentiment behind the idea that anything is possible, but ultimately, because everyone knows it's not true, it does lose a little bit of its impact because there's a slight disingenuity to it. And so anything isn't possible, but more than you think is probably possible. And I think that's a more realistic way of looking at it, is that more than you've seen before is possible. And I think one of the things that we need to adjust there or adapt when you say we want to sort of take on that possibility culture, as opposed to the idea of anything is possible, let's call it a possibility culture, that more is possible than you've got right now. I think the first thing is, okay, let's say that more is possible, but it's not all possible today. And that's the whole idea of the day one approach and figuring out daily non-negotiable behaviors, because it says, look, ultimately, more is possible, but not everything is possible today. Leadership isn't in the big things, it's in the consistent things. And so I think one of the things that really helps you get this mindset of possibility is consistency, which is to say, I am capable of more than I am right now. But that's not just going to happen in some big lightning bolt. It's going to happen as a result of a process. It's going to happen as a result of consistency. And it's going to happen as a result of behaviors that happen again and again. And I think that if you're not doing consistent behaviors every day that move you forward, it is hard to adopt the philosophy that something big is going to change in your life. If you see incremental changes, that idea that there is more, that more is possible, that anything, quote unquote, really means more than you thought. I think that's what's necessary, is to say, okay, anything is possible, but it's not all possible today. But what's possible are the fundamental non-negotiable things that have to be a part of every day in order to make this big thing happen. Like, if you told me I could lose 100 pounds, I'd just be like, okay, I guess anything is possible. And there's no way, it's too intimidating. But to say, can you spend today going 10,000, 15,000 steps and eating less than 2,000 calories and making it healthy? Yeah, I can do that today. And you string 10, 15 of those days together and you start to see results. That's when you understand that quote unquote anything is possible, because you started to do the foundational behaviors that have to be built up to do it. I think sometimes we say anything is possible. We think it's like winning the lottery. It will all happen at once. Yeah. The key mindset is to be like, no, this involves a whole lot of micro decisions that lead to the macro change.
Yeah, I like that. I like the taking a step back and making it a little more realistic in a sense. And I like a lot of these principles, a lot of these ideas work for adults. And how do you think we can teach the younger generations to try and become entrepreneurs and take more risks?
I think one of the biggest things, I mean, I'm from the education sector, but I started dealing with students when they'd already finished high school because I was at the University of Toronto, which is when a lot of the things that stand in the way of leadership had already been ingrained. And I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to stop punishing mistakes. And we can say, oh, no, we don't. But look, how old were you when you started to realize as a student, okay, why would they be grading us if it isn't to rank us? And why rank a group of people if it's not to make sure the people at the top get something the people at the bottom don't get?
Yeah.
And we can serve whatever silly platitudes we want to young people, as long as the reward structure is set up like that. Ultimately, we're going to have people realize that, oh yeah, I can do anything, or yes, I should be more than, I'm not just about my grades, but that's where all the rewards come from. As a kid, you get rewarded through sports and you get rewarded through school. And ultimately what we do is we go through a system, and kids go through a system that teaches you. You begin every assignment, every class, every task that you undertake at 100%. And every time you make a mistake, you lose points and you never get the points back. Mm-hmm. And what that does is it makes people less concerned with how talented, wise, and skilled they are at any given moment. And it makes them focus completely on how many mistakes they made along the way. Because at the end of a course on anything, we say, okay, the kid who got 95 is the one who's really good at it. But that kid might not have learned anything. They just may have avoided making mistakes, which means they probably didn't take chances. If you are an A student, where all the rewards come from in education, the worst thing you can do is take a risk. Because why would you risk your 98, right? But the kid who's got 75, yeah, he lost 25 points along the way, but those mistakes made him better right now than somebody who's got a 95. But instead, what we do is we reinforce the idea that the entire purpose of life is to stick to a particular list of achievements. Go to kindergarten and play nice. Go to elementary school, do what the teacher tells you. Go to high school so you can go to a good college. Go to a good college so you can get a good starting salary. Get the starting salary. Get into a serious long-term relationship, preferably a heterosexual one. Get married. Buy a house. Have kids. Get promoted a couple more times, and make sure your kids do exactly the same thing.
And be happy while you do it.
That we teach kids to treat their lives like it is some sort of giant scavenger hunt. And everybody has the same list, and you're supposed to check everything off as fast as you can because there's only so much. And if you don't get it, somebody else will. And what it does is our education system teaches compliance instead of courage. And it teaches that the people who get rewarded are the ones who make the fewest mistakes. So avoid the thing that teaches and causes growth. Basically, what we're telling people is avoid practice, because failure is basically reps for your resilience muscle. Mm-hmm. And, when we really think of it, bodybuilding is tearing down muscle so it builds back stronger. But intellectually, we don't let kids do that. We basically say, the key is to make as few mistakes as possible. And we are not going to get risk takers, and we are not going to get entrepreneurs, and we are not going to get people who say, hey, I don't need to have kids. I don't need to get married, or I want to. The desire to get married and have children and work in an office, etc., is learned. It's not instinctive. It's learned. And I think that causes a lot of people to be afraid of taking risks. We teach it. And until we reward our kids for taking a chance and losing some points at the same level we do for getting that scholarship because they didn't take any chances and they just tried to look good on paper, we're not going to have as many entrepreneurs, and we're not going to have as many risk takers. And I came from the education system, and it's empowering and it's liberating and it's so important, but it can also be one of the most dangerous systems that we have. And as parents, for those of you out there, one of the key things is to make sure that you let your kids know that grades aren't what impress you. Growth is what impresses you. And so I think that's really important.
In your book, you mentioned that you've coined something you call a lollipop moment. you tell us what that means? And do you have a lollipop moment of your own?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lollipop moment is a moment where someone's leadership is recognized. And usually the person was not aware of this leadership moment in their life. It's when one person tells another person that that first person had an impact on their life. Mm-hmm. And it came about because, 4 years after something happened in my life, I tried to look good on paper and get scholarships and found charities and do all these big things. And then one day a young woman came up to me and told me about this moment in my life that I didn't even remember, that had really profoundly impacted her. And it was on her first day of university, and she was so scared she was going to quit. And before she could actually say to her parents, "I'm done, take me home," I guess I walked out of a building. I had a stupid hat on and a bucket of lollipops, and I was trying to make people laugh and get them to do this charity I was working on. And she says, "You got to me and you smiled, and then you looked at the guy next to me and you basically said, 'Dude, you're going to be stuck in line for like 2.5 more hours, but you're standing next to this really beautiful woman and you should talk to her. Like, break the ice, give her this lollipop.'" And I held this lollipop out, and she said to me, "He looked so embarrassed and he just held the lollipop out to me, and I felt terrible for him because everyone's staring at him and kind of laughing. As soon as I took this lollipop from this stranger, you looked so disappointed and you told my parents, look at your girl, look at your little girl. It's her first day away from home, her first day without mom and dad to hold her hand and tell her what to do. And she is taking candy from a stranger." And she said, everybody laughed, and the laughter changed everything for me. And I said, "Okay, don't quit today. You can quit tomorrow." And she said that someone else did a little moment like that the next day, and I put it off and I put it off, and I never quit. And I graduate in a few weeks, but I heard you were leaving this place. This was my first university. And she said, "Before that happened, I had to come and tell you you've been an incredibly important person in my life, and I'm really going to miss you. So good luck." And she walks off. And I was just so shocked to hear this story and then she came back and she said, "There's one more thing you should know. I've been dating that guy for 4 years." And then a year and a half after I moved 1,000 miles away, the two of them invited me to their wedding. And wow. I don't remember that exchange. And I think that's what a lollipop moment is when you're made aware of an impact that you had and you just didn't even know. And of all of the stuff that I accomplished and put on my resume, ultimately I realized that maybe the biggest impact I ever had on another human being had nothing to do with all these plans. It was a result of an unplanned consequence of an everyday action. And so a lollipop moment is recognizing that leadership recognized is leadership created. And all of us have a boss or a stranger or a friend or a coworker who, in a moment where we needed it, changed the way we looked at the world in that moment, or how we felt about ourselves, or bailed us out of something. And that was a moment of leadership, and we didn't tell them that. And they're walking around out there, and they do not realize how much they matter to you. When you tell them that is creating a lollipop moment.
I like that. It's like when we dream big and we think of these plans that we have, and we put the plan, we think about the plan, we work on the plan, but we never really schedule it. And then once we don't schedule it, it doesn't really become real if we don't actually schedule it. It's like you're saying that leadership, there is leadership there, but it should be almost full circle to really make that leadership concrete, to like solidify the leadership, to make it, make sure the leader understands what happened, and there's growth between both parties.
Well, the fact that Drew gave a girl a lollipop and now she's married to that guy, and I hope they stay married for many years to come, that never went through your mind when you were giving the girl that lollipop, that you were going to change the whole course of their lives.
No, I was trying to get them to come out and do a charity. And like, let's be straight up. I was flirting with first year girls, get a chance to go out and hand out candy. And also, what's interesting is that how things shift over. I think part of leadership is being willing to to think differently about things you've already done. And like 20 years later, I now realize a couple of things. I mean, I'm so glad that moment worked out. It clearly did. But looking at it, the world, like as what I understand now is that there's a couple of things about that moment. One, that was not at all respectful of her personal space. And two, it was incredibly heteronormative to just say, oh, there's a woman here standing next to a guy. She's attractive. You should talk to her. And not necessarily. Maybe she was standing there quietly because she didn't want to talk to anybody. And, you know, it's amazing how even the biggest, best moments of your life, as you learn more, you can look back and say, I could have done that better. And that's been a really interesting thing to realize, is that this story that I tell, that in many ways has, you know, launched my career because the TED Talk went viral, is a moment that maybe I wouldn't do again, or I would do differently. And it was other leaders who opened my eyes to that. And so I think what's interesting is you talk about, you know, scheduling it, being deliberate. And my work in day one is very much about being conscious of those moments. And yet the story that sort of introduces people to my work is all about an accidental moment. The idea of day one leadership and identifying your values and then creating a plan to do it, which I know we'll dive into in a minute, is all about not making it an accident. It's got to be conscious.
Inspiration, we can see it can be received by somebody or can be given by someone else. What can we do as a daily practice to ensure that we're growing as inspired leaders?
So to dive down into the nitty gritty of the day one, I guess not diving into the nitty gritty, but to give a little more specifics because we don't have enough time to dive into the whole thing. Yeah. The day one approach in terms of being inspired every day isn't just, oh, I want to act a certain way. It is based on some psychological drivers. And it comes from a social experiment we did years ago at the university. But it basically came down to this. We picked a value we wanted to live up to. And in this case, it was impact. We said impact is a commitment to creating moments that cause people to feel as if they are better off for having interacted with you. And then we went out and tried to do that every day. But what we discovered is when we checked in at the end of the day is, while we could think of a moment where we had done that, we hadn't actually thought about it until the end of the day. So what we were doing is we were using this value we said was important to us to evaluate behavior that had already happened. And what leaders do is they have a plan to actually live their values every day, to impact their decision-making in the moment. So obviously just wanting to live this value wasn't enough. We all have things we want to consciously do, but life gets in the way. And so what I discovered is a couple of psychological effects. One called the Zeigarnik effect, which says things on your to-do list you haven't completed take up a more prominent spot in your consciousness than things that you have completed. In other words, stuff you haven't done bothers you. I didn't know there was a scientific term for that. It's called the Zeigarnik effect.
Zeigarnik effect, yeah.
Yeah. The second is called the question behavior effect, which says if I ask you a series of questions in the morning about a particular behavior, you're way more likely to engage in that behavior later in the day. So what we realized was, if unfinished tasks cause psychic discomfort until they're completed, and questions can drive future behavior, what we did is we harnessed the power of the unanswered question. The human brain cannot stand unanswered questions. It drives it nuts. Your brain will look for an answer constantly, consciously and subconsciously, until it finds one. And if it can't, it will make one up. That's how distressed the brain gets when it's faced with an unanswered question. It'll work on it nonstop. The best example I give is that at some point in all of our lives, we've been having a discussion with someone about the name of an actor or actress, and we can't remember it. And we promise ourselves, I'm not Googling it, I'm going to remember this. And then you just forget about the conversation. But sometime in the next 48 hours, when you're in the shower, when you're in a car driving somewhere, the name of that actor or actress pops into your head because your brain worked on it the whole time. So what we did is we converted our values into questions that in the process of answering them, you would live the value. And the specific one for that impact was, what have I done today to recognize someone else's leadership? It is impossible to tell someone that you see them as a leader, that they've impacted your life positively, that they matter to you without them walking away feeling better off. And so you can't answer, what did I do today to recognize someone else's leadership without living the value of impact?
That's a great question.
Yeah. And this isn't just what it does. It allows you to recognize the bus driver who takes you to work or to school. It allows you to recognize that person at the coffee shop who makes you smile every morning when they serve you your coffee. These are all leaders that we can recognize by saying, hey, the way you make me feel is leadership, because leadership recognized is leadership created. So that is the practice that I teach people in the day one approach. And what I teach in the book is that here's how to figure out what your values are. We picked impact, and then over the course of the year, we added 5 more. Here's what your values are. Here's how to define them. So they're not just words like respect and integrity and accountability. They actually have a definition. And then here's how you translate them into questions. And by the end of that year, back when I was doing this with students, we had developed 6 questions tied to 6 values: impact, growth, courage, empowerment, class, and self-respect. We created 6 questions associated with them, and we created the leadership test. This is the daily practice, your own personalized leadership test. And the basic idea that I adopt every day is this. Imagine if every night before you went to bed, you had to prove you deserve another day on this planet. Not at the end of a year or at the end of your life. Every single night before you go to bed, you had to prove you deserve another day on this planet. And in order to prove that, you have to pass the test. 3 out of 6 questions. The bonus is you are given the questions in the morning. And if that was our reality, those questions would be non-negotiable. We wouldn't answer them in between meetings and picking up the kids. They would drive our behavior every day. And what the leadership test does, what this approach does of taking values and translating them into questions that become non-negotiable to answer, is it prioritizes our to-be list above our to-do list. Passing that test means we complete our to-be list every day. And I think the reality is most of our lives are driven by our to-do list, and we sort of put our to-be list in the back when we have time. I think it's important to shift it. So that's a long answer.
What were those 6 things again? Can you list them again?
Sure.
The day test?
Here is, if you want to start on day one, here is the leadership test that you could use right now. My work is about helping you create your own, but here it goes. Impact. What have I done today to recognize someone else's leadership? Mm-hmm. Growth. What did I do today to make it more likely someone would learn something? And that someone could be yourself. For you educators out there, you do this all the time. Courage. What did I try today that might not work, but I tried it anyway? And empowerment. What did I do today to help someone else move closer to a goal? Class. How did I elevate instead of escalate today? Leaders elevate situations. They don't escalate them. Elevate means trying to succeed. Escalate means trying to win a situation. And then the foundation of the 6, the most important one, self-respect. A commitment to recognizing that when you are empty, you have nothing to give to other people. And the question there is, what have I done today to be good to myself? Those are the 6. You get 3 out of 6 and you pass the leadership test.
That's brilliant, because you're basically operationalizing leadership. So you have a way to assess it every day. And what I hear you describing with the bus driver, et cetera, is that leadership happens in every interaction, every text, every conversation, that this helps you assess if you're living your values every day.
100%. And if you don't pass it one day, that's okay. I say try to pass it 300 out of 365 days in a year. Same way I lost weight. I try to do these fitness and eating right 300 out of 365 days. And that's what it took. Because what it does is it builds in failure. It's not, oh, I can handle it if I fail. It's here's how I plan to fail. It's built in, so it doesn't kill momentum. And it's funny you say operationalize. That's actually the name of the process.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, operationalizing leadership values, turning these words we use all the time that we use to judge ourselves and others, and actually making it into like an actual behavior. Because, hey, if I walked up to you and said, hey, English isn't my first language, I've never heard the word integrity before. Could you explain what it means in the simplest English terms possible? Hey, we judge ourselves and other people by how much integrity they have. But hey, can you actually say integrity is a commitment to something? Like, finish the sentence. Integrity is a commitment to. Most of us have never thought about it, which means if you haven't defined it, how the hell do you live it?
Yeah.
It's incredible that a to-do list can get in the way of your to-be list. And a lot of things I focus on with students is the questions that they're asking. And I love that you're tying in the value and the values that they have and turning that into questions. Because my big thing is you change your question, you change your direction. And one big factor, I've my own personal story, which I've shared. I simply changed my question and I started focusing on that new question. It brings you to new opportunities. It brings you to new areas. That's beautiful, Drew.
No, thanks, man. I really appreciate that. I like that. It's the questions you ask. And honestly, what I tell people is in the question, what have I done today to make it more likely someone will learn something? One of the best ways of helping people learn things is to become better at asking questions. The types of questions where the person being asked learns more than the person doing the asking. And basically ask questions like a 5-year-old relentlessly and with no shame whatsoever. Because like 5-year-olds ask you questions that make you realize you don't know shit more than really any other group of people. Like, look, the sun's out. And then the 5-year-old looks at me and says, no, the sun is in. It's in the sky. What do you mean it's out? Look how bright it is. And I thought, fair enough, young man.
What's your edge of the bed question, Drew? If you're sitting with your son or daughter and they ask, what's your best life advice? Is that related to the edge of the bed question? I think you talk about it in your book.
Yeah, the edge of the bed advice. I don't like small talk. And so the edge of the bed question is my icebreaker, because I'm next to strangers a lot, whether it's on planes or trains or at receptions. And the edge of the bed question is, if it's your son or daughter's last night under your roof and you're walking by their room and they ask you to sit on the edge of their bed and they say to you, like, what do I need to know? Like, what insight has most contributed to your happiness? What would you tell them? And I'd ask people that question. And one of the things I discovered was people kind of freak out because if you want one answer, because what is one single answer you can give to that? You can't. So what I do is actually, as part of the process of helping people figure out their values, I ask them to sit down and write down 30 pieces of edge of the bed advice. Because if you got 30, some of them can be light and fluffy and funny, and others can be really serious. So I ask anybody who's listening to this, just imagine that scenario where someone you love so much, someone that you want to have a better life than you had, says to you, what insights, experiences, or knowledge have most contributed to your happiness? What do you tell them? And so when you ask what mine is, ultimately, I try to never limit it to one because it stresses you out. And so, in my book, and one of the things I tell people is here's 30 of them. And it goes from everything from, stop saying it's complicated when it isn't. Because people love to say it's complicated. It's never complicated. It's just what's complicated is doing what you want and being the person you want.
That's just an excuse.
Yeah. I mean, there are more Rosalines than Juliets in the world, right? Most of the things you think you desperately need to go, like, I just have to have this person, this toy, this job. It's like Rosaline at the beginning of Romeo and Juliet. We never meet her, but Romeo's like, I can't live without this girl. And we never even see her because he meets Juliet. Like most of the things that you want on this earth that you don't get, it was probably a Rosaline. And, another piece of advice I gave was that, look, like, don't forget, both Romeo and Juliet die at the end of that story. And I know that's dark, but like, I think that's a lesson that we need to teach kids. Love does not conquer all. It does, however, have a really good winning percentage. Like, love is basically LeBron James. You should adjust your expectations accordingly. You're going to win most of the time, but you will get beat. And I think if there's one single thing, you know, if I had to sit on the edge of the bed with my kids, if I could give them one line, and I don't think they'd understand it at the time. I know I wouldn't have when I went off to school, but keep it in the back of your brain, because there will be a time in your life where it will be relevant to you. And it's a line that I heard about 2 months after the woman I was going to marry passed away suddenly. And I heard someone say, always remember that grief is just love coming face to face with its oldest enemy. And that line is something that I think there are times in our life where we need to know it. And just, we judge ourselves, how we feel. We're not crying enough. We're crying too much. And just when somebody said, like, embrace it, because grief is just love coming face to face with its oldest enemy. And it blew me away. And so I'd make sure, if I had the chance, that I sit down and I tell other people's kids, I tell anyone listening on a podcast, like, there will be a moment in your life where that sentence will just give you a little bit of peace and calm.
You're making me think about how much time and effort people put to put a will together to allocate their assets to their children when they die. But my God, like, we've got to write down the 30 pieces of life advice on a letter and leave that for them as well, because that could be even more valuable than money. And they, like you say, they may not understand it today, but once they have an experience, advice might resonate with them later on.
Can I say, I'm going to steal that and say that on stage. I'm going to give you credit for it. But what a great point. We spend so much time estate planning, and we don't spend a whole lot of time wisdom planning. In leadership, you never steal an idea. You benchmark a best practice. So I am giving you credit for that, though.
Well, I appreciate that. I thank you for the idea of doing it, because, you know, a 6 and 9-year-old, I have 2 boys, 6 and 9, and I could write down my life advice for them now. They probably think I was just, you know, on drugs, as they usually look at me like, what are you talking about, Mom? But maybe when they're 20 or 30, this might mean something to them.
Yeah. And I think that I also wonder, like, if your kids are that young, how much they know about, you know, drugs, if they're already like, Mom's high. I'm like, you really set your kids up for life early. I like it.
Yeah. You know, street smarts go farther than book smarts. So,
The 9-year-old looked at me and said, "Are you high?" I'm like, "What movies are you watching?"
Hey, Drew, where can our listeners get in contact with you if they'd like, or find your book, or find out more about what you're doing?
DrewDudley.com, DrewDudley.com. And on there, you'll see videos. And if you're interested in having me come and chat a little bit, teaching your people the process, you can get the book there as well. The paperback comes out in the spring, which we're very, very excited about as well. And there's also an online program that you can check out for free and see if you like it, that walks you step by step through this entire process of what are your values and what's your leadership test. And so it's all at DrewDudley.com.
Awesome, Drew. Thank you so much for joining us on Inspired Leadership today.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure.
Thank you to our listeners. On behalf of my co-host, Tyler Bailey, and myself, Susan Power of Power HR. And thank you to our guest today, Drew Dudley. If you haven't already, it's definitely worth checking out Drew's TED Talk and catching him at the next conference that he speaks at. In closing, I want to read to you an excerpt from Dr. Seuss's Oh, the Places You Go, because I think it encapsulates our conversation at its essence with Drew. Wherever you fly, you'll be best of the best. Wherever you go, you will top all the rest. Except when you don't, because sometimes you won't. And will you succeed? Yes, you will indeed. 98.75% guaranteed. Kid, you'll move mountains. So, be your name Boxum or Pixie or Bray or Mordecai Alley, Van Allen O'Shea, you're off to great places. Today is your day. Your mountain is waiting, So get on your way. Till next time, stay inspired.